The air above the Alaskan wilderness was sharp with frost, a bitter reminder of the isolation that clung to this frozen expanse. Beneath a slate-gray sky, the research station loomed, a stark metallic structure anchored against the ceaseless winds. Inside, the hum of advanced machinery was the only warmth, punctuated by the occasional crackle of intercom chatter. For Dr. Caleb Moreau, the station's lead geophysicist, the isolation was a small price to pay for the chance to make history. The anomaly had appeared unexpectedly, a ghost in the data. Nova Genesis Corp satellites had detected it, a pulse of energy originating miles beneath the permafrost. Its rhythm defied natural phenomena, skipping between intervals like a cryptic code. Moreau had assembled a team to investigate, each chosen for their expertise and ability to endure the unforgiving environment. Sophia Lynn, the team's engineer, stood out for her stoic competence. The youngest of the group, she rarely spoke more than necessary, but could repair the station's drilling apparatus in sub-zero conditions without batting an eye. Then there was Lieutenant Mark Hadley, a former military operative turned security consultant. His role was clear: to keep the team alive, no matter what. Rounding out the group was Dr. Elena Vargas, a linguist and cryptographer hired for her uncanny ability to interpret patterns in anything from ancient hieroglyphs to artificial intelligence output. Though Vargas's inclusion raised eyebrows, what use was a linguist in a geological survey? Moreau trusted Nova Genesis's instincts. They rarely invested in failures. The discovery was an accident. It began with a routine drilling operation designed to extract ice cores from 2 miles down. Lynn monitored the drill's progress, her eyes darting across the screens displaying real-time telemetry. The drill slowed unexpectedly, as though it had encountered something harder than bedrock, but softer than metal. Moments later, an alert blared a breach. The screen flickered, and for a brief second, an otherworldly hum resonated through the station, rattling every loose bolt and nerve. What the hell was that? Hadley's hand instinctively went to the firearm at his hip, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room. Lynn frowned, hands flying across the console. The drill's gone through something. There's a cavity below. Huge. How huge? Moreau asked, his voice taut with restrained excitement. Lynn gestured to the screen, where a grainy 3D map rendered in real time. The cavity stretched for miles, an impossible void beneath the ice. It's not natural, she murmured. The walls are symmetrical. Moreau leaned closer, his breath fogging the screen. Symmetry was no accident. His mind raced, jumping from one hypothesis to another. Could it be an ancient volcanic chamber repurposed by early humans? A military installation from the Cold War, long forgotten? But none of those ideas explained the energy signature. The team debated their next move, but Moreau's decision was clear. They had to send a probe. Within hours, Lynn had configured the station's autonomous rover, outfitting it with high-resolution cameras and sensors. The team gathered in the control room as the rover descended through the drill shaft. Its camera feed was grainy at first, but as it reached the cavern below, the image sharpened. "Dear God," Vargas whispered, her hand covering her mouth. The screen revealed towering spires, their surfaces shimmering with an iridescent hue that shifted colors like an oil slick. The structures were immense, rising hundreds of feet into the darkness. Alien carvings adorned every surface, intricate patterns that seemed to ripple when viewed directly. In the center of the cavern was a massive monolith, its surface pulsating with faint blue light, like a heartbeat. This is a city," Moreau said, his voice barely audible. "An ancient alien city." The words hung in the air, too heavy for anyone to respond. The rover moved deeper into the cavern, its lights scanning the structures. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum that had returned, stronger now and almost melodic. The team leaned in closer, captivated and uneasy. Then the rover's feed cut to black. "No!" Lynn shouted, frantically typing commands to re-establish the signal. Static filled the speakers, interspersed with brief bursts of what sounded like distorted whispers. Hadley straightened, his expression grim. "We should stop." seal the drill shaft, and report this to corporate. We don't know what's down there. We can't stop now. Moreau snapped. This is the discovery of the century. Maybe the millennium. We're going down there. Vargas, still staring at the static-filled screen, spoke softly. Caleb, we don't know what this place is. It could be a tomb or a treasure, Moreau countered. Think about it, an entire civilization we never knew existed. The technology alone could change everything. Energy, medicine, communication. We owe it to the world to understand this. Hadley's jaw tightened. We owe it to the world to stay alive. The argument ended with an uneasy compromise. They would descend, but only to map the area and retrieve the rover if possible. As Lynn prepared the equipment, Vargas pulled Moreau aside. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice low. I've seen carvings like those before. Not identical, but similar. Indigenous art from this region sometimes features patterns that resemble those symbols. They call it the Watcher's language. Stories say the symbols aren't meant to be read, but to ward off intruders. Moreau frowned. Are you suggesting this is connected to local folklore? Aliens and legends don't mix, Elena. Maybe not, Vargas admitted. But those stories always end with the same warning. Don't wake them. A shiver passed through Moreau, but he quickly dismissed it. Folklore was just that, stories. This city, this discovery, was real, tangible, and brimming with potential. When the elevator platform descended into the darkness later that night, the team was silent. Each carried their fears like a weight, unspoken but palpable. The hum grew louder as they neared the cavern floor, wrapping around them like a living presence. As the platform settled with a metallic clang, Lynn's voice broke the silence. I think the city's vibrating. Like it's alive. Moreau stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the glowing monolith in the distance. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the carvings on a nearby spire. They felt warm, almost alive. Above them, the surface shuddered as the winds picked up, howling across the frozen wilderness. The city had been silent for millennia, but now it was awake. The cavern swallowed them whole, its oppressive vastness defying comprehension. The faint glow of the monolith in the distance cast strange, shifting shadows that made the alien city seem alive. The air was dense and metallic, carrying a faint vibration that resonated deep in the bones of the team. Dr. Caleb Moreau led the group with a single-minded focus, his lantern cutting through the dark like a scalpel. Behind him, Sophia Lynn adjusted her handheld scanner, its screen alive with erratic spikes of energy. This place shouldn't exist, Lynn muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. The readings don't make sense. Energy levels like this should fry every circuit we have, but she trailed off, her brow furrowed in frustration. It's almost as if it wants us here, Dr. Elena Vargas said quietly, her eyes darting across the walls. She traced her gloved hand over the carvings, marveling at their precision. The alien symbol seemed to shift subtly, though she couldn't decide if it was a trick of the light or something more sinister. These markings, they're like language, but not just for communication. It feels like they're watching us. Eyes forward, barked Lieutenant Mark Hadley, his rifle sweeping the shadows. This isn't a sightseeing trip. We don't know what's down here. The group pressed on, their footsteps echoing ominously through the cavern. The path led them to a towering archway, its edges lined with faintly glowing patterns that pulsed in time with the hum permeating the air. Beyond it lay a sprawling plaza, the monolith standing tall at its center. Around the plaza were statues, dozens of them, humanoid but grotesque, each one unique. Their elongated forms twisted unnaturally, their faces frozen in expressions of agony or terror. Vargas stopped cold. These aren't statues, she said, her voice trembling. They're remains. What? Moreau turned to her, his face a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. They're petrified. Look at the detail, the texture of the skin, the positioning. These were living beings once. Vargas stepped closer, her breath hitching as she noticed something even more chilling. And they were trying to escape from something. Enough speculation, Hadley snapped, though his grip on his rifle tightened. We need to get what we came for and leave. Lynn crouched near one of the statues, her scanner emitting a low beep. The material, it's organic, but there's something else, like it's fused with the structure of the city. These beings, in this place, they're connected. As if in response, the hum intensified. The glowing patterns along the walls flared brighter for a moment before dimming again. The team froze, exchanging uneasy glances. Moreau forced a grin. It's just an energy fluctuation. This place has been dormant for millennia. Let's not jump to conclusions. Dormant doesn't mean safe, Hadley muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning every shadow. The monolith loomed closer, its surface impossibly smooth and radiating a cold, bluish light. Lynn's scanner began to malfunction, emitting bursts of static. She smacked it in frustration, but the readings remained incomprehensible. "There's something in there," Lynn said, nodding toward the monolith. "A power source, maybe. It's overwhelming my equipment." Moreau's excitement eclipsed his caution. He approached the structure, drawn to it like a moth to flame. "It's extraordinary," he said, reaching out a hand. "Don't touch it," Vargas hissed, grabbing his arm. "You don't know what it could do." Before Moreau could respond, the hum shifted into a low, resonant tone that seemed to emanate from the monolith itself. The team staggered, clutching their ears as the sound vibrated through their skulls. The glow intensified, casting the entire plaza in an eerie, shifting light. "Back away!" Hadley shouted, pulling Moreau from the monolith. Then the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, like the hiss of wind through the cavern. But they grew louder, layered and chaotic, an incomprehensible chorus that seemed to come from every direction. "Do you hear that?" Vargas whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't just hear it. I feel it," Lynn said, her eyes wide with fear. "It's inside my head." Hadley scanned the area, his breathing ragged. "We're not alone," he growled. The shadows moved. At first, it seemed like a trick of the flickering light, but then one of the shapes detached itself from the darkness. It was humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though it were struggling to maintain form. Its face, or what passed for one, was a featureless void, but its presence exuded a primal, suffocating dread. "Stay together," Hadley barked, raising his rifle. The figure flickered, disappearing for a moment before reappearing closer, as if reality itself couldn't contain it. The team scrambled, retreating toward the archway. More figures emerged from the shadows, each one flickering in and out of existence. "What are they?" Vargas gasped, clutching the carvings for support. "Doesn't matter. Just move." Hadley fired a shot, the crack of the gun echoing through the cavern. The bullet passed through the nearest figure, which flickered violently but remained unscathed. The monolith's glow pulsed erratically, the hum reaching a deafening crescendo. The team made it to the archway, Lynn frantically working to reactivate the elevator platform. Come on, she muttered, her fingers flying over the console. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, as the figures closed in. Moreau turned back to the monolith, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and fascination. "It's alive," he said, his voice barely audible. "The city, it's alive." Hadley grabbed him by the collar, pulling him toward the elevator as the platform began to ascend. The creatures reached the archway, but stopped, their flickering forms seeming to hesitate at the threshold. As the platform rose, the team stared down at the alien city. The monolith's glow dimmed once more, the whispers fading into silence. The figures stood motionless, their featureless faces turned upward as if watching them leave. Lynn collapsed against the railing, her breathing shallow. What the hell just happened? No one answered. The hum was gone, but its resonance lingered in their bones. As they emerged onto the frozen surface, the night sky stretched above them, indifferent to the horrors below. Moreau's gaze lingered on the drill shaft, a mix of fear and obsession in his eyes. "It's not over," he said quietly. "We've only scratched the surface." The others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Somewhere below, the monolith pulsed faintly, as if in anticipation. The station was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a fortress against the unknown, and every creak of its metal walls felt like a harbinger of doom. The team had returned to the surface shaken, but alive, their silence heavier than the sub-zero air that howled outside. For hours, no one spoke. They moved through their tasks like automatons, their minds replaying the horrors they'd witnessed below. Sophia Lynn sat hunched over the control console, her fingers trembling as she reviewed the rover's corrupted data logs. Most of the files were garbled beyond repair, but fragments of footage remained, brief, jittery images of the monolith, the statues, and the flickering entities that had nearly claimed their lives. "It's like the city is rewriting the data," Lynn muttered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Dr. Elena Vargas leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. "Rewriting it how?" Lynn gestured to the fragments. "These aren't glitches. They're deliberate changes. Look here." She pointed to a sequence of distorted symbols flashing across the screen. "It's the same pattern as the carvings down there. Whatever's controlling that city is intelligent." Vargas's stomach churned. "It's trying to communicate." Dr. Caleb Moreau, pacing in the corner like a caged animal, stopped and turned to them. "Or it's trying to warn us," he said. "Warn us about what?" Vargas asked, her voice sharp with frustration. Moreau didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the window, where the snowstorm raged outside. "We've disturbed something ancient, something that was meant to stay buried." Lieutenant Mark Hadley, cleaning his rifle at the table, scoffed. "Then let's bury it again. Blow the drill shaft, seal it off, and call it a failed expedition." "We can't do that," Moreau snapped, his voice rising. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Do you know what this means for humanity? For science? For getting us all killed?" Hadley interrupted, standing to his full height. His presence was imposing, but his voice was calm and steady. "We barely made it out alive, and you want to go back down there? That's insanity." "It's not insanity," Moreau insisted, his eyes blazing with fervor. "It's responsibility. That city holds answers to questions we haven't even dared to ask. We owe it to the world to understand it." Hadley glared at him, his jaw clenched. "The world doesn't need answers that come with a death toll." "Enough!" Vargas shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "Arguing won't change what's happening. Whatever we awaken down there, it's not going to stay contained." As if on cue, the station lights flickered. A low, guttural hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The team froze, their eyes darting to the equipment. Lynn's voice wavered as she read the monitors. "The energy signature. It's spiking. The monolith." The hum crescendoed into a piercing shriek that rattled every bolt in the station. Sparks erupted from the consoles, and the screens went black. Then, all at once, the sound stopped, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. "What just happened?" Hadley demanded, his voice taut with tension. Lynn frantically rebooted the systems, her face pale. "The energy pulse. It surged through the drill shaft and into the station. It's like it's trying to bridge the gap between the city and us." Moreau's expression darkened. "It's not just a city. It's alive, and it knows we're here." Before anyone could respond, the lights in the hallway flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Vargas instinctively reached for a nearby flashlight, its beam barely piercing the encroaching gloom. A sudden metallic clang reverberated through the station. "What was that?" Lynn whispered, her voice trembling. Hadley raised his rifle, motioning for the others to stay behind him. He moved cautiously toward the hallway, his boots crunching against the frost-laden floor. The others followed at a distance, their breath shallow and quick. The sound came again, louder this time, a rhythmic pounding, as if something was trying to force its way in. "It's coming from the airlock," Hadley said grimly. They reached the airlock door, its surface vibrating under the force of the pounding. Frost spread across the metal in intricate, unnatural patterns, forming shapes that resembled the carvings from the city below. Moreau stepped forward, his curiosity overriding his fear. "It's them," he said almost in awe. "The entities. They've followed us. Then they can stay outside." Hadley growled, leveling his rifle at the door. The pounding stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. Lynn's handheld scanner emitted a series of erratic beeps, the screen flashing red. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely audible. "Something massive. It's surrounding the station." A deep, resonant vibration coursed through the floor, knocking the team off balance. The walls groaned under the pressure, and a faint, otherworldly light seeped through the cracks. "We have to get out of here," Vargas shouted, panic rising in her voice. "How?" Hadley barked, his gaze fixed on the airlock. "We're trapped." Moreau's mind raced. "The emergency tunnel, it leads to the secondary outpost a mile away. If we can make it there." Another deafening screech cut him off, this one echoing from deep below the station. It was the sound of the city calling out, its voice reverberating through the ice and into their very bones. "The monolith," Vargas said, her eyes wide with terror. "It's summoning something." Lynn's scanner flashed wildly, the readings indecipherable. "Whatever it's summoning, it's already here." The airlock door began to warp, the frost patterns spreading like veins. A crack appeared in the metal, a thin line of blackness that seemed to swallow the light around it. From within, a whispering chorus emerged, the same voices they'd heard in the cavern below. "Go!" Hadley barked, shoving the others toward the emergency tunnel. The team sprinted down the corridor, the whispers growing louder with every step. The walls vibrated violently, and the station structure groaned as if it were being pulled apart. They reached the hatch to the emergency tunnel, Lynn frantically entering the override code. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow shaft lined with frost. "Get in!" Hadley shouted, his rifle aimed down the corridor. As the team scrambled into the tunnel, Vargas glanced back and froze. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, its form shrouded in shadow. Its featureless face turned toward her, and for a moment, she felt an overwhelming wave of despair, as though her very existence were being unraveled. "Vargas, move!" Moreau yelled, pulling her into the tunnel. The hatch slammed shut behind them, but the whispers persisted, faint and haunting. The team crawled through the icy passage, their breaths visible in the frigid air. As they reached the end of the tunnel, Lynn hesitated, her hand on the final hatch. "Even if we make it out, it won't stop. The city knows we're here. It won't let us go." Moreau's voice was grim. "Then we'll have to find a way to stop it. Before it stops us." Lynn opened the hatch, revealing the snow-covered wasteland beyond. The storm had subsided, but the night was darker than ever, the stars obscured by an unnatural haze. Behind them, the whispers grew louder, as if the city itself were reaching out to claim them. The frozen wasteland stretched out before them, an unbroken expanse of glittering ice and shadow. The air was suffocatingly still, the unnatural haze blotting out the moon and stars. Each step through the snow felt heavier than the last, as though the ground itself resisted their progress. Dr. Caleb Moreau led the way, his face pale but determined. The emergency outpost was a faint glimmer on the horizon, its beacon barely visible through the swirling darkness. Behind him, Sophia Lynn clutched her malfunctioning scanner, the device now little more than a dead weight. "It's close," Lynn whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I can feel it." Lieutenant Mark Hadley tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Keep moving. Whatever's following us, it's not getting past me." Dr. Elena Vargas trudged alongside them, her breathing ragged. The image of the shadowy figure still haunted her, its void-like face burned into her memory. She glanced back toward the station, now just a faint outline in the distance. The whispers had subsided, but the sense of dread lingered, thick and unrelenting. "Do you think it's still watching us?" Vargas asked, her voice barely audible. Moreau didn't answer. His focus was on the beacon ahead, though his mind was elsewhere, on the monolith, the city, and the inexplicable forces they had unleashed. The silence was broken by a sudden, low rumble beneath their feet. The ground trembled, and a web of cracks began to spread across the ice. "Run!" Hadley shouted, propelling the team forward. The rumbling grew louder, and the ice fractured violently, massive chunks splitting apart to reveal the black abyss below. Something moved beneath the surface, a serpentine shadow that coiled and undulated with terrifying speed. "What is that?" Vargas screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony. Lynn glanced at her scanner, its screen flickering to life for the first time in hours. The readings were incomprehensible, but one thing was clear. Whatever was beneath them was colossal. "It's part of the city," Lynn gasped, stumbling forward. "It's alive, and it's coming for us." The shadow beneath the ice surged upward, and a massive tendril of black, liquid-like material burst through the surface, writhing and twisting as though testing the air. The tendril lashed out, striking the ground with enough force to send shockwaves through the frozen landscape. Hadley opened fire, the rifle's muzzle flashing brightly in the darkness. The bullet struck the tendril, but it merely absorbed the impact, its form rippling like disturbed water. "Keep moving," Moreau shouted, pulling Vargas to her feet after she stumbled. The outpost beacon grew closer, its pale light cutting through the oppressive gloom. The team scrambled over jagged ice, dodging the tendrils that erupted around them. Each one moved with an unnatural grace, as though guided by a malevolent intelligence. As they neared the outpost, the tendrils slowed, retracting back into the ice. The ground fell still, and the air became eerily quiet. "What's it doing?" Vargas asked, her voice trembling. "It's waiting," Moreau said grimly. "It knows we have nowhere to go." The outpost loomed ahead, a small, weathered structure built for emergencies. Lynn reached the door first, fumbling with the access panel. Come on," she muttered, her fingers shaking. The door hissed open, and the team rushed inside, collapsing against the walls. The interior was dimly lit, its air stale but mercifully warm. Hadley moved to secure the entrance, bolting the heavy door. "This won't hold if that thing wants in," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Lynn powered up the control console, her fingers flying over the keys. "The outpost has a satellite uplink," she said. "If I can send a distress signal, maybe someone will—" Her words were cut off by a deafening roar that shook the entire structure. The walls groaned under the pressure, and a deep vibration resonated through the floor. "It's here," Vargas whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Moreau stepped to the window, peering into the darkness. At first he saw nothing. Then, the haze parted, revealing the towering form of the monolith, now impossibly closer than before. Its glow was blinding, its surface shifting with alien symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. "That's impossible," Moreau said, his voice barely audible. "It's not just the city," Lynn said, her voice hollow. "The monolith is the city. It's the core and it's moving." Hadley turned to Moreau, his patience finally snapping. "You wanted to understand it? Fine. Explain this. What the hell does it want?" Moreau stared at the monolith, his mind racing. "It's trying to complete something. A cycle, a signal. Something we interrupted by going down there." Lynn slammed her fist on the console. "Then how do we stop it?" Before anyone could answer, the monolith's glow intensified, and a blinding beam of light shot into the sky, piercing through the clouds. The team shielded their eyes as the light enveloped the outpost, its brilliance accompanied by an ear-splitting hum. The light faded, leaving behind a deafening silence. When the team lowered their hands, they found themselves surrounded, not by the outpost walls, but by the alien city. The monolith stood before them, impossibly massive, its surface alive with shifting symbols. "No," Vargas whispered, stumbling back. "This can't be real." "It's not real," Moreau said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "It's projecting this, trying to communicate." The symbols on the monolith began to shift, coalescing into shapes that resembled faces, human faces. They spoke in unison, their voices layered and distorted. "You disturbed the cycle," the monolith intoned, its voice reverberating through their minds. "You will restore what was lost." Lynn stepped forward, her fear replaced by defiance. "What cycle? What do you want from us?" The monolith's symbols flickered, and the ground beneath their feet began to dissolve, revealing the void below. Unity, the monolith said. You will become one with the city, as all before you. The team scrambled, but there was nowhere to run. The void consumed the ground, pulling them toward the monolith. Moreau turned to the others, his face pale but resolute. If we're part of the cycle, maybe we can break it. How? Hadley demanded, gripping his rifle. Moreau looked to the monolith, then back to the team. By giving it what it wants, or taking it away. Before anyone could respond, the void claimed them, plunging them into darkness. The last thing they heard was the monolith's voice, echoing in their minds. You cannot escape the city.